Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Wake Up, Look Up, a podcast where we connect events happening in real time to the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm Zach Weihrauch. In today's episode, we're asking the question, will I ever be a grandparent? This is prompted by an article I read in the New York Times recently that looked at the decline of adults having children, but it didn't look at it from the perspective of husband and wife or two people in their 20s or 30s deciding whether or not to have kids. It actually looked at it from the perspective of their parents who are now realizing they may never be grandparents. This is actually a growing cultural trend, and it's something we've talked about on Wake Up, Look Up before, the increasing decline in childbirth rates and the implications that has for society. But here's another way of looking at it. In 2021, studies showed that just over half of people over the age of 50 had at least one grandkid. And now that sounds like a lot, right? A little over 50%. But that number is actually a 10% decline from the same study done in 2014. Less and less adults are having kids, which means less and less elderly adults are experiencing getting to be a grandparent. And this is producing some negative feelings in the generation that thought they would be stepping into grandparenthood in the next few years. It can lead to feelings of isolation. I mean, after all, it would be pretty difficult to sit at a table and listen to your peers talk about time with their grandkids when you don't have any and may never have any. It can also lead to broken relationships between parents and their children as the younger generation lets mom and dad know, hey, we're not having kids and you're not going to be a grandparent. It can lead to feelings of resentment and bitterness. This is something we have to be thinking and talking about because statistically, this is going to affect some of the people listening to this podcast. There are going to be some of you listening whose children may have told you they're not going to have kids. You're not going to be a grandparent. There may be others listening to this episode who are younger saying, hey, we're actually thinking about not having kids. So how do we think about this trend from a biblical perspective? And the answer to that is really two things, and they're going to sound paradoxical. And that's okay because sometimes what the Bible's asking us to do isn't easy. First, for those who are having to face the fortune of not being grandparents, those in their 50s, 60s, and 70s realizing they will never have that experience, it's important to remember that the biblical concept of love is not a response to people who give us what we want. In other words, we don't love our kids because they give us grandkids. We don't love our kids because they meet our expectations. They live life according to our pattern. I mean, look, I want to be a grandparent. It would be pretty devastating if none of my kids decided to have kids. But love is ultimately about me serving them, not the other way around. Of course, we need go no further than Jesus for this. Jesus told us, greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. Not love is what you give your friends when they lay down their lives for you. We have to love our children, irrespective of what they do for us. If your children are telling you, hey, we're not going to have kids, that's hard, but it should not affect the way you love them. And if it has, that is not fundamentally about them. That's fundamentally about you and I, in the self-centered way we can tend to love each other. However, if you're on the younger end of this and you're thinking maybe about not having kids, I would just challenge you with this. I hope you know on Wake Up, Look Up, I stop short of trying to label things as sin that the Bible has not labeled as sin. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to tell you that having children, if you're married, is a righteousness issue. But I will say this. When the Bible talks about marriage, it always talks about kids. This is always true of the biblical picture of marriage, but it's true even in the beginning. In Genesis 2, when God gives Eve to Adam and Adam to Eve, he tells them to be fruitful and multiply. That part of what it means for them to be human, part of what it means for them to be married is that not just that they would enjoy sexual intimacy, but that sexual intimacy would lead to procreation. In the Bible, when marriage doesn't result in children, it's usually a sign of brokenness. It's a cause for lament and mourning and for crying out for God's intervention. Be wary of constructing a view of marriage and a view of family that is outside the bounds of what the Bible has described. Children are a blessing, and we got to make sure that our perspective on kids isn't being shaped by society, by culture, or even by our own selfish desires. But all that to say, let's make sure we're talking to each other, one generation to the next. Let's make sure we're saying, we love you, no matter what choices you make. And let's make sure we're hearing that maybe our original plan is outside of what God wants for us. Communication is the key to healthy relationships, especially when tough things are being discussed. Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. While you're here, we'd love to ask you to hit subscribe or to like so you get future content. If you listen to the audio version too, make sure you leave a review and a comment. That really helps. Consider sharing it on social media and helping us get the word out. And hey, while you're here, check out all the other content that Christ Community Chapel is putting out, including the videos that are around me right now.